Hey everyone, I'm Ellie Harper. I'm married to the most incredible guy, Nate, and we have a little girl named Ava who lights up our world. Life's pretty amazing now, but let me take you back to when I was 18, fresh out of high school, when everything I thought I knew about my future came crashing down. This isn't just a story about struggle. It's about finding strength when the odds are stacked against you, about proving people wrong when they bet against you, and about holding on to hope when it feels like the world's trying to snuff it out. Stick with me, because this journey's got twists, tears, and a whole lot of heart. It was June, the day of my high school graduation. The air was thick with summer heat, and I was standing in my scratchy blue cap and gown, clutching my diploma like it was a lifeline. My classmates were laughing, snapping photos, tossing their caps in the air. It should have been one of the best days of my life. Instead, it became the day my world tilted. My stepmom, Diane, caught me as I was hugging Nate, my boyfriend at the time. She had this smile, tight, practiced, the kind that never reached her eyes. "Ellie, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "We need to talk about your dad's college fund." My stomach dropped. My dad, who'd passed away the year before, had set up that fund when I was a kid. He'd sit, me on his lap, his calloused hands ruffling my hair, and say, "Ellie, this is for your dreams. You're gonna go to college. Make something of yourself." It was his promise to me, one of the last things tying me to him. I looked at Diane, my heart thudding. "What about it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't even blink. "It's not going to you," she said, like she was telling me the sky was blue. "Your brother Caleb and I discussed it. We think it's better used for something practical. Caleb's got big plans, a business venture. College isn't really your path, Ellie. You're more free-spirited." I stood there, the noise of the graduation fading into a dull roar. Free-spirited? That was her code for not good enough. My hands shook as I gripped my diploma tighter. "That's my money," I said, my voice cracking. "Dad set it up for me." Caleb, who'd been lingering nearby, sauntered over. He was always Diane's favorite, the golden boy who could do no wrong. "Ellie, chill," he said, his tone so casual it stung. "I'm gonna make that money grow. Start a business, invest it smart. Dad would have wanted us to be practical. You can take out loans like everyone else if college is such a big deal." Loans? The word hit me like a slap. That fund was my ticket to a future Dad believed in, and they were ripping it away like it was nothing. I wanted to scream, to shake them until they saw how wrong this was. Instead, I just stared, my chest tight with a mix of anger and betrayal. Diane glanced around, her smile faltering as a few classmates nearby turned to look. "Keep your voice down, Ellie," she hissed. "This is family business. Don't make a scene." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked away, my cap still on, my gown swishing against my legs. That night, I sat in my bedroom, the walls covered in faded posters from my childhood. The house felt too quiet without Dad's booming laugh. I stared at the ceiling, replaying Diane's words, Caleb's smirk. My dad was gone, and without him, it felt like Diane and Caleb held all the cards. I was alone, or so I thought. The next morning, I tried talking to Diane again, hoping maybe she'd reconsider. I found her in the kitchen, sipping coffee, her nails tapping on the counter. "Diane, please," I said, my voice small. "That fund was Dad's gift to me. You can't just take it." She sighed, like I was a kid throwing a tantrum. "Ellie, you're an adult now. Time to grow up and figure things out. That money's for the family, and that includes Caleb's future. You'll be fine." Her tone was final, like a door slamming, shut. When I told Nate later, he was livid. His brown eyes flashed as he paced my tiny porch. "They can't do this, Ellie. That fund was yours. We'll fight it." But I didn't know how. The account was in Diane's name, and without Dad, I had no one to back me up. Legal battles cost money I didn't have. "Let it go," I told Nate, my voice hollow. "It's not worth it." But deep down, I made a vow. I'd prove them wrong. I'd show Diane and Caleb I didn't need their money to make something of myself. The next few years were a grind. I enrolled at a community college, the only thing I could afford without the fund. To pay for it, I worked 2 part-time jobs, one at a diner where the coffee was always burnt, the other at a used bookstore that smelled like dust and old paper. My days started at 6 a.m. with classes. Then I'd rush to the diner for the lunch shift, my sneakers sticking to the greasy floor. Nights were spent shelving books or studying in the back room, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. I lived on instant ramen and adrenaline, my bank account always teetering on empty. Meanwhile, Caleb was living large. He'd started some business, a vague startup that sounded more like an excuse to spend money. Diane bragged about him at every family gathering, her voice loud enough to carry across the room. "Caleb's so driven," she'd say, her eyes sliding to me. "You could learn a thing or two, Ellie." It made my stomach twist. I'd bite my tongue and nod, but inside I was screaming. Nate was my rock through it all. We'd gotten engaged by the time I transferred to a 4-year university, a small state school that offered me a partial scholarship. When I told Diane about the engagement, she raised an eyebrow. "Marriage, Ellie? That's a big step. Are you sure you're ready? You're still figuring things out." Her tone was the same one she used when I was a kid spilling juice on the carpet, like I was a mess she had to clean up. Caleb, of course, had to chime in. "Yeah, focus on getting a real job first," he said, smirking. "If you can call what you do a career." I forced a smile. "Don't worry about me," I said. "I've got this." But inside, I was burning. Their words were like gasoline, fueling my drive to keep going. University was a different kind of hard. I was juggling full-time classes, my diner job, and a weekend gig at a campus coffee shop. My life was a blur of lecture halls, greasy aprons, and late-night study sessions in the library, where the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry bees. I'd scribble notes in the margins of my textbooks, my hands stained with coffee grounds. Most days, I barely had time to eat, let alone sleep. There were nights I'd collapse on my twin bed in the cramped apartment I shared with 2 roommates, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Was it worth it? Could I keep going? But then I'd think of Dad. I'd hear his voice, warm and steady. "Ellie, you're tougher than you know." And I'd think of Diane and Caleb, how they'd written me off. That was enough to get me out of bed, to keep pushing. They'd taken the fund, but they couldn't take my will. One of the hardest moments came during my first semester at the university. My laptop, a clunky hand-me-down from high school, gave up the ghost a week before finals. I didn't have the cash to replace it. I borrowed an ancient one from a classmate, so slow it took 5 minutes to open a Word document. Spent nights in the library, fighting back tears as I typed papers that were due the next day. One night, I just broke down, my head in my hands, the screen blurring through my tears. It wasn't just the laptop. It was everything. The weight of being on my own, of knowing Diane and Caleb were out there, living off Dad's money while I scraped by. I wanted to quit, to crawl into bed and never get up. But then I thought of them laughing, of Diane's smug, "You'll be fine," of Caleb's smirk at the grocery store when he'd seen my basket of cheap canned soup while he loaded up on steak. "Still doing the struggling student thing, huh?" he'd said, his voice dripping with condescension. That memory lit a fire in me. I wiped my tears, took a shaky breath, and kept typing. I wasn't going to let them win. Things started to Shift in my second year. I landed a paid internship at a small advertising agency, a gig that felt like a lifeline. The pay wasn't much, but it let me quit the diner job, giving me a few extra hours to breathe. More than that, it gave me a glimpse of a future I could build. I was working on real campaigns, sitting in meetings with clients, learning how to pitch ideas. For the first time, I felt like I was good at something. My supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Maria, pulled me aside after a presentation one day. "Ellie, you've got a knack for this," she said, her eyes warm. "You connect with people. That's rare." Her words were like a balm, soothing the ache left by Diane's dismissal. But even with the internship, life was relentless. My days were a marathon. Morning classes, afternoons at the agency, nights at the coffee shop, or studying in my car between shifts. I was exhausted, my body running on caffeine and sheer stubbornness. My social life was non-existent. I missed birthdays, parties, all the things my classmates took for granted. There were days I felt like a ghost, drifting through my own life. One of the lowest points came during a Thanksgiving dinner I wish I'd skipped. Nate convinced me to go to Diane's for family harmony. I should have trusted my gut. The dining room was packed with Diane's friends and Caleb's so-called business partners, the table groaning under platters of turkey and wine bottles. I sat quietly, picking at my plate, hoping to stay invisible. But Caleb had other plans. "So, Ellie," he said, his voice loud enough to silence the table. "How's that glamorous student life? Still slinging coffee and scraping by?" A few guests chuckled, their eyes darting to me. My face burned, but before I could respond, Diane jumped in, her tone syrupy. "Now, Caleb, be nice. Ellie's doing her best. Not everyone's meant for big things right away." The way she said her best was like a knife, twisting in my gut. I gripped my fork, my knuckles white. Nate reached for my hand under the table, his touch grounding me. I forced a smile and said, "I'm doing just fine, thanks." But inside, I was screaming. How could they be so cruel, so casual about it? That night, driving home with Nate, I stared out the window, the city lights blurring through my tears. "They'll never see me," I whispered. Nate squeezed my hand. "They don't have to, Ellie. You're doing this for you, not them." Nate was my anchor in those years. No matter how dark things got, he was there, steady as a heartbeat. I'd come home from a late shift, my feet aching, my eyes gritty, and he'd have a plate of spaghetti waiting, or just a mug of tea and a quiet smile. One night stands out in my memory. I'd just bombed a midterm, one I'd studied for weeks to ace. It felt like the final straw, like the universe was telling me to give up. I walked into our tiny apartment, dropped my bag, and started crying, right there in the doorway. Nate didn't say anything at first. He just wrapped his arms around me, letting me sob into his sweater until I could breathe again. When I finally told him about the exam, he sat me down on our thrift store couch, his hands warm around mine. "Ellie, listen to me," he said, his voice firm but kind. "This test? It's one moment. It doesn't define you. You're out there doing what most people would have quit 100 times over. You're allowed to trip, but you're not gonna fall. You're stronger than this." Then he got up, made me a cup of hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, and sat with me until I could smile again. It wasn't just his words. It was the way he saw me, believed in me, even when I couldn't see myself. That love carried me through. By the time I graduated, I felt like I'd submitted Everest. Walking across that stage, my cap slightly crooked, I heard Nate and my few close friends cheering from the crowd. Diane and Caleb weren't there. I didn't invite them. This moment was mine, earned through years of sweat and tears. As I gripped my diploma, I thought, they don't get to touch this. It was one of the proudest days of my life. Not long after, I landed a job at a mid-sized advertising firm. It wasn't flashy, but it paid enough to let me breathe, to stop checking my bank account every day. Nate and I got married the next year, a small ceremony with wildflowers and fairy lights in a friend's backyard. When we found out I was pregnant with Ava, it felt like the universe was finally saying, "You did it, Ellie." Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, built from the ground up. Climbing the career ladder wasn't a cakewalk, but it felt like a natural extension of the grit I'd honed in college. I started at the bottom, handling accounts no one else wanted, staying late to tweak presentations, taking on extra projects just to prove I could. Slowly, people noticed. My boss, a gruff guy named Tom, called me into his office after a big client pitch. "Ellie, that was damn impressive," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You've got a gift for this. Keep it up, and you're going places." His words hit me hard, not just because of the praise, but because they highlighted what I'd never gotten from Diane or Caleb. Strangers saw my worth, while my own family never did. I'd overhear colleagues whispering, "Ellie's a rock star," or "She's gonna run this place someday." It felt good, but it also left a hollow ache. Why couldn't Caleb have said something kind just once? Why couldn't Diane have looked at me with pride instead of pity? That sadness lingered, a quiet shadow in the back of my mind. But I didn't let it stop me. I kept pushing, kept building. A few years in, I got promoted to account manager, leading my own team. It was surreal. Me, the girl who'd once cried over a broken laptop, now running meetings and signing off on campaigns. I'd walk into our office, the windows overlooking the city skyline, and think, I made this. Ava was toddling around by then, her giggles filling our apartment, and Nate was still my biggest cheerleader. Life was good, but it was more than that. It was proof. Proof I didn't need Diane's approval or Caleb's validation. Proof I was enough. Looking back, I realized something. The fund wasn't just money. It was Dad's belief in me, his dream for my future. Diane and Caleb tried to take that away, but they couldn't. They could take the dollars, but not the fire Dad lit in me. Every late night, every tear, every moment I wanted to quit but didn't. It was all for him, for me, for the life I knew I could build. And I did. So, if you're out there, feeling like the world's against you, like the people who should lift you up are tearing you down, hear this. You are enough. You don't need their permission to shine. Keep pushing. Keep fighting, keep believing. Because one day you'll look back and realize you didn't just survive. You thrived. And that's the sweetest victory of all. Thanks for sticking with me, friends. If this story hit you, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's keep this conversation going. I'll see you in the next one.